you. So as the introduction was referenced, Eric and I met at Science Alive. I have two children that I am trying to coax into being engineers long term. So we do support those types of things. The information that I'm sharing with you today is somewhat informal. It's really about a journey that I've personally been on and really what I'm working towards from both a professional perspective and what I believe in. So I'll talk through the past in terms of some of the projects and some of the activities. I'll share a little bit of insight through my time at Tesla, and then we'll kind of talk a little bit around some of the automotive frameworks around, let's say, the commercial conditions for the automotive industry and where things are moving. And then we'll kind of finish on probably not being involved in passenger vehicle as an OEM. We've decided to kind of, with the closure of the automotive space, focus really on what is an adaptable market here in SA. And I'll show you a project that will break cover at the end of this week. Okay? So I don't know how the forums normally run. It looks a fairly informal forum, so I'm happy to take questions as they come up, specifically relevant to the materials that I show. So as I said, catchily named the past, the present and the future. Personally what I believe in and what I've just structured some of the information in to reflect. So those that have picked up on the accent will have picked up I'm originally from the UK, just outside the Midlands area. My father was an automotive engineer, my brother was an automotive engineer. It made good sense for me to follow in that kind of jet stream. So I started my career as a manufacturing engineer, MG Rover, when it was the Rover Group, when it was Land Rover was our large car SUV. Rover Group had two business plants, small and medium cars in Longbridge and cars down in Cowley, which was the 600, 800 series. So the first vehicles I got involved with were the Mini, the MGF, and then the Rover 200 launch and subsequently the 200 refresh. And to my sins, I was the manufacturing launch engineer that didn't do the BRM brand good justice when we did the relaunch of the Rover 200. I was then part of the BMW group that moved into advanced manufacturing structures at the FITS in Munich, looking at design front-wheel drive vehicles for BMW. That took a bit of a broad spectrum into a very narrow spectrum, so I decided to run away as fast as I could from that, and I went to Lotus. I joined Lotus late 90s. The Exige Mark 1, the 340R, and Monza, which is the current platform release, were part of my programs that I took to production. From that, I went into TWR, where I've left the cunning bit out of the history, which is where I went into China and launched a car in deepest, darkest China for a company called Wuling Motors, based down south in Luzhou, which now produce 1 million cars a year out of that plant. I came here to Australia as a principal engineer, working alongside Holden engineers, and Tom Wilkinshaw, based on the HSV, had a relationship with the chairman of Holden at that time. What came out of the relationship, regular cab, crew cab and all-wheel drive cab, were designed in the UK, and we basically launched them into the Elizabeth plant. And my role there was to launch. Best thing that came out of that project was my future wife. I have to say that, and that's why I'm back here now. I had a cleansing of the soul, and I decided to move away from consultancy to doing something meaningful, and I pivoted into Tesla in 2005. I ultimately became the operations director in the UK to run that program for the Roadster, and then moved to the US, where I was part of the exec group to do the due diligence from moving from Los Angeles, where we were originally going to set up in a film studio called Downey. I was actually on site doing soil samples with the team on the day that we announced that we'd moved away from Downey and bought the Fremont plant. And then I did some of the initial due diligence on Model X. Lost the battle on the gull wing doors. A number of good friends lost their jobs trying to make it work. And then I came back to Australia, and then I picked up the role as managing director for ZF locally, where we make all axle systems for Ford, Holden, and based on the relationships in the West Coast, I ran the acquisition and the suspension design program for Farraday, and I'll share some of that detail with you. And then at the end of this presentation, I'll share with you what we're doing locally on electric vehicles as well, and building a manufacturing OEM basis. So that's me. That's a 20-year career. Some nice cars and some bad cars. Can't pick all the projects, unfortunately. So this slide is actually a slide from Tesla's IPO pack. Yeah, this was something that I presented back in the day when we were raising the funds. So let's try and get this right. This was ultimately our Roadster 1.0 exterior vehicle package, which everyone will recognise from a Lotus. I also included what I refer to as the carryover parts. When you look at a Tesla Roadster, it's distinctive to Lotus based on one attribute only, which is the side glass. The glass house is ultimately what defines the characteristic of the vehicle. There's only 7% carryover material between a Lotus Elise and a Tesla Roadster. Everything else is pretty much re-engineered. Some of it was re-engineered just on the fly, and some of it was purposeful. So there's 3 points of engineering that really kind of trademarked that program for me, and I always think about them because they always make me chuckle. The sill on the Roadster is lower, and that's predominantly because after we built the first engineering prototype, we sent it to the US for Elon to do some review. His first wife, Justin at the time, didn't like the fact that she had to lift her heels over the sill, so we had to lower the sill for ingress-egress. Made perfect sense because of the target market and the sale price. But to lower the sill on the car required a whole new load characteristic for crash. So we had to restructure the whole chassis, had to restructure the whole carbon backbone for load management, simply because the feedback from the CEO at the time was his wife thought she was lifting her heels too high and she couldn't protect her modesty. True story. Second bit, when we were racing towards getting to production, we actually couldn't release the bumpers in time because we hadn't actually worked out the badge. So that's why the Tesla badge went from the T into the T that it is today, because we spent many hours working out what badge should we have, and we couldn't decide. So the decision was made very quickly, go with a badge, and we'll work it out in the future. So on the Roadster 2.0, you'll see a different badge to the Roadster 1. And the reason is we had to release the rim tooling to be able to make the bumpers. We couldn't do so with the way that it was because we had nowhere to put the badge. It's a great story. There's lots more. When we originally did the engineering prototypes, we never had chance to do the swing angles on the door charger relative to the shark fin. So the shark fin on the back of the door relative to where the hinge point was on the charge. On the engineering prototypes, they catch. You fundamentally can't close the driver's door if the charge cap's open. It's a mechanical failsafe on an electric car. Didn't go down too well. So those are some of the issues. For me, the car was fantastic to work on because it was new technology all the way through. It was the first production car to have resin transfer mold carbon. Now, it's not a great technology, but from a cost of body set system, it was 20% of the cost. And against the GRP weight, there was significant advantage. We've talked around the interior. I'll show you a little bit more on the interior in a moment. Chassis we've talked about, and the subframe. We built this vehicle down the same production line as a Lotus Elise. So you can take an Elise, an Exige, what was the track vehicle at the time, I forget the name, but then you could also have a Roadster go through at the same time. And we made all the operations substitutional through the main build process. We took 30-odd% of the throughput volume of Lotus with the Roadster. I'll show you a couple of more images on that. So those with the lighting's not fantastic, but that's probably what you see on the first Roadsters, and is the giveaway how early they are. Because the first Roadsters were designed with a dynamic core, a moving shift speed. Extract was the Formula One transmission group that we were using at the time. We simply couldn't get the synchro mesh to work with the power ratio and the output. Couldn't do it. So that's why in 2.0 we went to selected ratios on the buttons, and that's where Tesla is now. This is a little bit of a story about where the vehicle was. So I joined Tesla in 2005. I was the first operations automotive guy to join the business. My interview consisted of a discussion with a guy called Tom Coulson, Mark Tarpening and Martin Eberhard on a sofa on Commercial Street in Redwood City in California. I'd flew over. I'd been in corporate consulting, large-scale OEMs, to find myself sitting in a factory on a sofa with these guys. I didn't know who they were and where they'd been and what they'd done. My research hadn't gone that deep. But probably the smartest guys I'd ever kind of sat down and had a discussion with around what was possible to deliver a car. And I'm sure some of you have read their stories there. To date, Tom Coulson, he's probably one of the smartest chemical engineers and engineers full stop that I've ever kind of worked with. Good guys. So 2005 is when I started. We started series production of the validation prototypes in 2007. By the start of 2008, we were in series production, and we were then starting to ramp and make customer orders. We then had Roadster 2, the right-hand launch, and then the right-hand launch. We originally started off with 1,500 cars and moved to 2,500 based on demand. We sold the Signature Series 100 as $100,000 deposit, 14 months from receipt. That in itself, you think, okay, there's there's millionaires, there's all types of demographic out there backing this program. Probably the most empowering visit we ever had was 2 retired school teachers from California who believed so much in the technology and what was possible, and had put their pensions into this vehicle as part of being part of the movement. And that in itself kind of really inspired a lot of the engineering team who had worked on cars and cars to actually understand that this was something much, much bigger. Probably one of the craziest decisions we had to make for a financial reason was we originally started as a full, and then the logistics of moving the batteries from Asia into North America to make the packs, and then send the packs to the UK to integrate into the vehicle, to then send back to the US, was a bit of a logistics expense. So we decided that we would, US vehicles, would be producing what was referred to as a glider, where we would commission a high voltage vehicle without the battery pack in it and do a dynamic roller test on an umbilical cord power set. So originally the CEO of Lotus was crazy, take a car up to 100 miles an hour with no direct power line or power train in the vehicle, only off umbilical feed. But such was the solving capability, we overcame it to deliver the vehicles. I'll share a little bit more on the manufacturing side. So this is the paint shop. Paint shop very similar to Aston Martin, all panels laid in car line and sprayed through hand spray. This image doesn't come through too sharp, but this is the main mechanical assembly line in Lotus, final buy-off. Virgin did well with us for a couple of years with the air freight. This is Menlo Park. This was in just down from Redwood City on El Camino. This was the first ever Tesla dealership At the back of that dealership was where we used to bring all the gliders in and fit all the powertrain. So operation wise, all vehicles built in the UK and then moved through to the US. So it's an interesting manufacturing model. All demand predominantly came through. And I think the first Australian vehicle, I think, was sold into Adelaide. Orange vehicle, Simon Hackett. It was always interesting seeing the manifest of where the cars were going to. Your curiosity would naturally spike up. There'd be celebrities and there'd be interesting people. I didn't know who Simon was at the time. Very distinctive. And based on building the car there, my wife being from here, I kind of took a little bit of an interest in that, and then subsequent vehicles. The interesting thing was when you had celebrities or let's say film people or music people, I never heard of a band or a certain person in a band until I said that was the car going. My wife had never given me a business card before. So that PDI, when the vehicle's released, you need to just put that in the glove box and see if he calls. This is the discrete manufacturing activity for the vehicle. Paint application, standard. We ended up with, because of the carbon, we ended up with barrier films in the carbon. This is the mechanical assembly line for all, let's say, small Lotus platform. That ended up being the AEVA production line. This was, so we would build the chassis. Around about here, we'd fit in all the powertrain. So ESS being the energy storage system, the power electronics module, the motor trans. It would then come down to a main bond station where all the panels would be bonded to the structure. Yeah. Similar to how Aston Martin were producing cars for recent. Lotus obviously still use that. And then all door subs would come on through this area. It would come through into this area, which is where we had all the Tesla engineers, where we would do dedicated high voltage bring up. Probably one of the key risks for us were taking a workforce that we're used to a mechanical assembly of a vehicle, and it's a low volume. These hours, 126 hours to produce, they were technicians building and crafting a car. This was not a type of Holden where the materials be delivered to a guy a metre behind him, he picks it up, fits it. This is very much more of a craftsman and a fit-out activity. We were concerned where operators would they try and fit something. We use a little bit of technician finesse, make something fit, self-tappers and so on, and go into the high voltage system. So I think everyone's aware the Roadster high voltage system runs at 400 volts, which is live once you bring the vehicle out of the hibernated state, which is, we did that at this stage. So all the final program and buy-off of the vehicle was done with the high voltage live. So kind of rattling through at a high level. Is there any questions? All good? So then, I remember the conversation on a Sunday afternoon. I had a phone call from Elon, and so I reported to Elon direct for 3 years during the Roadster programs. We had a conversation, and he asked me to move to the US. Model S was in its second generation. Its original conception was codenamed White Star. So the Roadster's codename was Dark Star. Model S in its first inception was White Star, and that was to be manufactured out in New Mexico originally. That program got stopped with the GSC, so we recreated the program. It went live, and we were working out of SpaceX in Los Angeles to start with. This again is from the IPO pack. The premise of looking at the vehicle was always to have the most elegant saloon vehicle possible on the market. World beater in every category, and the fact that it was electric was a bonus. It was never purposely designed as an electric vehicle then tried to fit into the saloon spectrum. It was designed to be the best it possibly could be, and by the way, it's an electric drive vehicle as well. So specifically on the weight, being an all aluminium structured vehicle posed a lot of challenges in the design. High pressure nodes around the front and the rear system with directional extrusions linking in. So it's an extension, it's a significant extension from where the Roadster base architecture had come from. The fact that we wanted to have 7 seats because there wasn't a saloon vehicle within it. I don't know if it was if it's ever been registrable in Australia to have the rear-facing seats in the back. I don't think it has. No. Originally, we used to manufacture those, and then obviously the infotainment system, the performance attributes. A gentleman called Peter Rawlinson was the lead architect for this. His precision around the powertrain installation deliverable, the torsional stiffness that was expected, the ride, the handling. This, I think most people have probably been in one by now, but the performance of a vehicle was second to none. I had the luxury of being in the UK and driving the engineering prototype Roadster for 18 months. I used to drive, I think from a geographical perspective, Lotus is in Norwich. I lived in Cambridge. It was a 76-mile commute each day. We used to play around with the regen to see if I could get backwards and forwards without touching the brakes. It was good. Whilst I talk about the software, I'll let you know another little secret. When we originally started developing of the Roadster, we never put the software interlocks on the repole of the motor. Aerodynamics were not as good, but you could go fast in reverse. It was a Friday afternoon where myself and the chief body engineer, a guy called Matt Windle, we decided we'd go and try and see what we could actually get done on the Lotus test track. It took security to slow us down, but it was probably one of the perks of the job. So, Model S, we were talking through the 5-star. Elon was always specific around this. We will be 5-star category rated in every category, not 5-star rated in one category that would wash over as a branding activity. So crash was there was a lot of work done on crash and energy management. And then interior wise, the whole thing was to be much more engaging than a standard vehicle. Carry the philosophy over. So that is one of the original slides from the IPO pack. Me personally, if you look at a conventional vehicle, everyone talks about a modular platform, the family tree. The truth is, if you look at a standard vehicle, there is no such thing as modularity. Between the engine to the bulkhead, that's as much as you can actually claim to be carryover. Because from that point forward, from the centre line of the vehicle rearward, you have the transmission structure, you have the seating structure, you have the exhaust line based on the powertrain, you have the braking system. All the sheet metal actually becomes bespoke and it becomes a variable to it. Whereas actually in an electric vehicle, if you create truly what is a skateboard, which is the drive system, the battery system, and it all sits underneath, I often refer to as the old Land Rover. You had the old Land Rover cab versus the chassis. Then you went into the monocoque structure and everything becomes unique and everything becomes multiply more complicated. Tesla's advantage was that actually, once you've designed a powertrain, you can change that powertrain and you can bolt that powertrain to new body. Yeah, you have to work out the crash pulse based on the weight, the long arms, the mass, the structure, but it's exponentially easier than trying to do a whole new vehicle, which is why most OEMs in the conventional ICE space, they do a model year change on engines and they do a platform change on bodies. Very rarely do they do the two together because it's exponentially more difficult to run the engineering programs to control it. So for me, this was what we launched, a fantastic system. So batteries themselves were an evolution from the Roadster laid flat. We basically worked through the water cooling loading and what was possible density. Powertrain team under JB had kind of worked all through that, and Jason Menders kind of was the lead engineer. The motor and transmission was the next step function. The original motor on Roadster was air cooled. Obviously, through the learnings of what went on, we went to a liquid cooled. This was the original CAD package for the front system. And then really what we understood, this was from the IPO pack as well. Sedan, the cabriolet version, the commercial vehicle, and the SUV, which ultimately became Model X. This was understood back in the 2011. This was clearly understood as part of the strategy and go-to-market position. So I had the luxury of doing the due diligence on the NUMI site. So the NUMI site, I think it was just under 400 acres as a facility. Quite a daunting place. We were full bore to build in Downey. We had a couple of quality issues, the Bay Area, and we were struggling with that. And the NUMI site became available. And the NUMI site became particularly of interest because it allowed the relationship with Toyota to be constructed for what ultimately became the RAV4, the electric RAV4, which was based on the Roadster program. So we had this facility. This facility was capable of 450,000 units per year, and it had been left dormant, a bit like how Holden will be structured from November onwards. So we had the option of deciding how to work through. Now the challenge that we had to build Model S was Toyota use all their own proprietary software and PLCs. So you had a plant that could produce 450,000 vehicles, but not one piece of equipment would run because it was all off proprietary software. So it all had to come out. Trying to manufacture a vehicle of a price point, of a premium segment, off equipment that had been set up to produce mass small vehicles was never going to work. So it all had to get ripped out. Probably one of the more interesting projects. So my role at that stage was I was operations director. So I ran all material and process flow across the plant. I ran all plant engineering for the site, and I ran all IT infrastructure, which is referred to as MES, which is the manufacturing execution system. So how you take a customer order in Japan, America, UK, and you execute them into a build to the right configuration with the right material demand and out. That was my role at the time. So the team that I had, we basically set up a process flow in what was referred to as the eastern side of the plant. So we had a plastic shop, a stamping facility, body in white, and then we originally planned paint. This is not an accurate image. We had originally planned paint. Paint ended up going through the truck, the old truck facility, and then back out for general assembly. That was the original scale plan to 20,000 units. This project, this was fantastic. We bought Schuller press. Schuller presses are probably the best in the world for stamping panels. It was a hydraulic press because of the deep forms we needed structures. So we brought the press out of a facility called Tower in Michigan. We deconstructed the press. We shipped it from Michigan on road and rail to the West Coast. And then we reconstructed it. It cost us, in orders of US dollars, cost us $4 million to buy North America's largest press bed. Cost us $22 million to put it in place. By the way, just about here is the San Andreas Vault line. That was a challenge. As an engineer from the UK, I'd never worked with seismic loads. So whenever you construct a building on California, you have to take into account seismic load. So putting a press in of that size and that magnitude was a challenge. We had to put a power station in just for the press line to run. And the problem that we had was that we originally wanted to look at Tesla. You'll be familiar. Tesla set up an engineering center in Auburn Hills in Detroit. Originally, that was the strategy, to bring in the automotive talent to be able to scale the business. The challenge that we had is it's a three-legged race between the technology aspect and the conventional OEM aspect. And if that three-legged race isn't in harmony, you're not making much ground. So the decision was made by the execs to move everything to the West Coast because that was where the art of the possible truly was possible. So we ended up with no supply base on the West Coast. I learned very quickly trying to coordinate inbound materials that if you're coming over the Denver Pass, you need to allow an extra 3 days for the trucks to get over through snow chains. Trying to explain that to Elon was a challenge. The one thing I'd always say about Elon, he was always reasonable. We had a challenge once in the launch where we couldn't get materials in. So the only way we could sustain production and meet the investor requirements, because we were doing quarterly calls now as well, because we were on the market. The only way we could get material in was for him to cancel a holiday, us take his plane, fly down to Mexico, get the headliners and bring them back. It was a difficult conversation, but we kept production running. So this was the tower line. This was a great piece of engineering for me. Probably one of the key pieces of equipment that I look back on with fondness. This automation line for the main body is up there. It's good. This for me is always one of the most interesting. We designed the whole general assembly line in here off AGVs. It's fantastic. Flexible, can do anything you want with it. This guy, he's now the operations director at Farraday, putting together their strategy for manufacture. Happy days, probably aged me, like dog years working in a startup. For every 1 year you do, it feels like 7. So that was the pack. That's where that's where I come from. That's the project done. I haven't gone into specific technical details around it all. As you'd imagine, each program had its own technical challenges, both in the drive line, both in the body engineering, both in the supply chain construction. But ultimately, they were all there for what was possible to be delivered. If I talk to you about the present, and I'll talk to you around what we're currently working with within the automotive space. This is a slide I always kind of work with to show people how the advancements being made now, which will further accelerate autonomous drive vehicles. So we have now a maturing powertrain. There are several multiples of international companies all working on high density motor driveline systems, transmission systems, all working towards kind of different states of vehicle. You have large mass logistics application. You have mass transit public. London have now come out and said they will not buy a diesel bus after 2021. Everything has to be electric in London. That's 5,000 electric double-deckers to go into London alone. We look at the lightweight materials, what's happened from aviation down. That's quite important, as it obviously energy reduction, range extension. Also, what's really becoming quite interesting is that a vehicle is no longer just a vehicle. A vehicle is only a vehicle to another revenue model. And that's took a lot of time for people to actually understand. Tesla, well, it's a fantastic car company. It's not actually a car company. It's a power company. Farraday is not actually a car company. It's a media platform. Zoox is not a rideshare, well, is not a car company. It's a rideshare platform. Every new vehicle car company startup has different models, and it's no longer about buying a car. People often refer to as a car ownership for A to B. Generations that are coming up are no longer interested in buying their own vehicle to go from A to B. If you look at why people are now buying high-price vehicles, it's to do A to A driving. So if you look at where McLaren have come from in the last 4 years, McLaren from a standing start to where they are today, because there's more people with disposable income who will just want to get in a car and drive a car. And that's a different technology sector. All around the electric vehicle and the connected vehicle is all about mobility and revenue models. And I'll show you that. Shifts in the mobility preference. I think this is probably one of it. Nearly 50% of Gen Y consumers like to use a smartphone to get transport. There's actually a statistic that says as rideshare comes online and autonomous driving comes online, the automotive industry will compress by 1/3. Because if I'm driving my car to work, it's my second highest priced asset and it's my most underutilised asset. So Gen Y have already worked it out. They're no longer emotionally involved. It's a commercial decision. They won't do it. They'll stay at home. They won't buy a house, but they won't buy a car either. And then autonomous technologies. So I always refer to the AAA. First of all, you have to have assisted technologies, lane change. Then you have to have automated technologies, automatic braking. Then you can start to move to autonomous. And we've had those prior to technologies for a while. The only point I personally haven't worked out is who sues who. Once everyone gets comfortable with the pathway of the lawsuit, everybody will be able to then accelerate the autonomous motion. The problem that you have today when you look at YouTube and you look at people going, reading the paper. I was in California a couple of weeks ago and there's a guy in Redwood City arrested because he was reading the paper whilst he was being driven to work. He wasn't in control of the vehicle. And the regulators will move, but ultimately until the civil lawsuits start to come in, I use a simple analogy with my management team. Every fatality has happened to date has come off the driver selecting that he accepts the terms and conditions. No, I'm not aware of a vehicle incident where an innocent bystander has been injured or killed off the technology. When that comes in, that will be the first test of the lawsuit and what autonomous technologies, who sues who. Was it the driver not in control? Was it the algorithm fail in the vehicle? Meaning the OEM is to blame. When that lawsuit happens, that will be the interesting point. That will be the turning point.
Just on that sort of thing, why aren't the truck companies heading towards that? Because they just...
The technology exists, it's the concept level for it, the appetite for it. I think next changes will happen before passenger vehicle and it will become dedicated infrastructure. So here now you can jump on the buses from the airport into the city and they have dedicated laneways for inductive charging as well. They've made that commitment on an infrastructure basis. I think you've got to get to a point where you have dedicated lanes on autonomous vehicles. That then will become the pathway to go forward. And Proterra are a good company. Ryan Popple, CEO of Proterra, the bus company in the US. He's raised 250 million now on electric buses. His play isn't to generate electric buses. His play is to generate electric, autonomous, mass transit networks around megacities. That's a great play. And I think it will come. I don't think it will come yet because you still have to have the driver in there. So then it becomes an argument of who was truly in control. And then unions and so on and rights. I think that's the challenge. If we can get dedicated laneways, I think that will accelerate it. This is an image I always show in regards to where the automobile came from. Should be an actual electric one. Where it came through to where it's actually going. And no one will stop this. This is where it will go. And the challenge is where the vehicle is today. It's a hybrid position between what we know as conventional. It takes 3.5 years to develop a car. It's regulatory requirements, it's ADR requirements. All these things have to be it. Whereas actually, if you accept a new smartphone, how many people get software pushes on their phones? Yeah. What that's basically telling you is the product isn't robust or there's a new fail-safe that needs to be put on your product. Now, each electric car these days comes with a Wi-Fi card. You can stream music. There also may be some things happening in the background. Yeah. And that's referred to as the beta, right? Electric vehicles are no longer referred to in these conventional terms of engineering prototype, validation prototype, pre-sales prototype, ship to commerce release. They don't exist. You go from alpha and beta because it's moved to a consumer electronics architecture mindset. And that's the interesting bit. And this whole slide challenges the paradox of what will people accept in an electric vehicle in a digital platform? Will they accept failure of the system? You're more tolerant with this model than you are this model. But where will you actually settle long term? That's the position.
You've got a problem with the diverse needs of people. Like in European cities, there's no place to park a car, so automatic cars are a good idea.
Yep.
In Australia, you've got so many places to park in the suburbs everywhere.
But that goes into what I see as the next step in that specific instance. In a smart city, so probably one of the key words now you start to hear bandied around is smart city, and it's all around making your life easier. Yeah.
I understand the concept. Unfortunately, in Australia, we don't have smart councils or smart development.
I think it's a movement for me. I was horrified when I came back to Australia.
It's a great idea.
I couldn't purchase a Tesla because it wasn't on the island yet. I couldn't buy a plug-in hybrid that I could in the UK from Toyota. I couldn't buy a RAV4 electric like I could on the West Coast. And every dealership I went to and I said, this is the car I want, this is what I want. And they said, we're not going to sell that here. Well, why? Because the consumer doesn't want it.
No, it's rubbish.
I don't disagree. We know what we want.
You need to invent a smart politician.
I think the challenge for me is it will come. I think the rate of adoption is slow in Australia, but I think once people understand that actually it's all possible, it will accelerate.
To me, the hang-up is that there are too many entrenched people who've got too many their money in the pie, and what's going on at the moment don't want to change.
I think this is where I'll go to the next slide and I'll show why I think will change it.
Okay. So it will change, sorry.
Sorry, it's a busy slide. The car maker is no longer relevant, right? In the car, there needs to be an app that talks to the parking location. That as I come down the hill from the hills, I can book my car parking space in 30 minutes. Why can't I do that? I need to be able to do that. The car should talk to someone and do that. Okay? ADAS level 4, which will come through in the cars. As long as that location is geographically mapped, it will go and self-park itself. I was watching Farraday do it a couple of weeks ago. Quite interesting. The exec gets up, puts the car, tells it to go and find a car parking space in its works car park, and it does it. And they've actually, I won't tell you which vehicle they were doing it with, but they've got their own vehicle and they've got some competitive vehicles that they've set up with the ADAS system. So it's totally coming. It's whether the regulations can enable or slow. That's going to be the key issue. I personally believe there are too many people now active on creating revenue from products that will, the OEMs have got to accelerate, and the OEMs don't know how to accelerate. That's the problem, which means there's space for disruption, not only as new car companies, but also new suppliers. The company I always like to talk about is NVIDIA. NVIDIA is a chip manufacturer. Started off over 10 years ago. Relevant in the general scheme of automotive. Now the chip is in every BMW and all premium product because they've actually controlled the infotainment capability of what you can do. And I think that supply never existed. ZF is the second largest automotive supplier globally. As the electric motor takes off, that replaces a large transmission business for us, and we've got to change. And we have to adopt the newcomers, which is where we are and what we're working on. And really hard for us is new car companies don't necessarily care to the detail of ride and handling because they care about the other aspects. Like in a Farraday vehicle, there's 2 4G cards in a Farraday. You can download Netflix faster in that car than what you can in your house. Right?
If the Wi-Fi works.
Well, with the 4G, it's there. And that for me is interesting. So you look at the owner and the entrepreneur backing it. He owns a company called Li TV in China. It's ultimately a multimedia platform push. He'll sell your films for your kids as you're driving. That's what the platforms will become. So the car companies They're having to change. So you run through this. There's obviously what will be disruptive in the automotive space. The finance model. There's a whole conversation happening now around the circular economy. So if you buy a car and your car has 200 kilograms or 1,000 kilograms of aluminium in it, do you buy that aluminium or do you just rent it? Because policy in automotive says end of life, you have to be able to recycle all that material. So why are you paying for something that the OEMs already have to recycle? And the policy says you're going to create a second generation revenue and finance model off. Everybody's thinking differently, and it will be extremely disruptive all the way through the curve. Any questions on, so those are my books on the models in the landscape.
Yeah, just on the, you just brought it up then with the Tesla, the first models.
Yeah.
How many are they still running, a lot of them, or are they just?
Oh, look, I'm not privy to how many are on the road.
Yeah.
All I know is I can't buy one for an investment,
Yeah.
both in the UK or here. And even in the US, they don't come up. They're all garaged. That's the problem. They're investment pieces now.
And we had nefarious reasons for not having electric cars here. Then when you had the thing in the United States to 24,000 US, the Australian dollar was higher, and more advantageous. Well, they offered for sale here at 66,000. They're telling us that you don't buy them. That's ridiculous. That was the structure of it.
I have a real problem with the automotive industry in Australia. Great, we're amongst friends then. So I get to travel through India, Thailand, Malaysia. Their political position has been, if you want to come into our country and sell vehicles into our population, we'll get you to set up what's called a CKD kit. So you'll ship your cars in the kit form, we'll assemble them, we'll get a certain amount of local content, and we'll build our industry supporting your vehicle, we'll build technology and capability. Last year was the second record growth year for Australian vehicle sales. 1.2 million vehicles were sold in Australia last year. It was not only the second record growth year in population of sale, at the 1.2, it was also the highest average price point. So we don't have a problem in terms of addressable market in this country. The incumbents have had a problem in the right product offering. And that for me has been the problem in terms of the local market. But if you look at the federal market and the national market in terms of sales, we've got premium and luxury car taxes where we receive economic benefit but no real industry benefit. You would be, in my personal opinion, you would be better off lowering the tariffs of import, making a competitive market and getting industry involved in producing 20% of the supply chain, different supply chains for different OEMs, creating the industry capability, retaining the engineering capability, creating the apprentice pathway. That is far more beneficial than the dollars.
They did that back in the 60s and 70s. They had Australian content requirements. They phased all that out.
For me, it should be there now. When you talk about a 1.2 million unit sale, manufacturing in SA represents 7% of the economic base. That's currently, that's before we get to the end of the year. I think that's a challenge in itself. So let's talk Farraday just for one moment. So this represents the interior, completely new design interior structure. A vehicle that's worth over 150,000 US and it has 2 seats in the rear. It has a pretty cool drop-down 21-inch screen in the back there. You can watch your TV channel if you want. But its whole purpose is not to be a car. It's to be a mode of transport and to be a way to be connected to do different things. This is what I referred, we talked to it earlier about the skateboard. This is a thing of beauty. So these are axle systems. This is ZF's LR3 axle, which we designed for the large vehicle. So it's interesting around this is it has active rear kinematics, which is active rear steer up to 3 degrees. So on the front, you have, let's say, drive-by-wire, yeah? On the rear, digital drive. Right, calibrated to front. Low speed manoeuvrability, mid speed comfort, high speed stability. Right. If you want that technology other than this vehicle, you look at Lamborghini, Ferrari, Porsche, because that's what's in their high performance. And a Honda Prelude has them as well. Yeah. But that's where this potentially goes. Now, the architecture on the L3 you'll see is it's an artistic representation, but the axle system scales down based on the scale of the vehicle, going from a large SUV down to a city car. Now the battery just compresses by string and by module based on the energy density. So the main power system is a modular construction, a modular build out by string and by module. It's elegant. And then what I really like about electric cars is as the chemical technology improves in each of the cells, you can actually rate and actually improve range and performance. It's a bit like what Tesla did when we started. The P90 was the flagship, now it's the P100D. Yeah. The density of energy has been what's improved. This refers to us what we were talking about, the change of the business model. The car is the ecosystem, which then wraps into the intelligent modules, whether it's Uber or whether it's some of the artificial intelligence that can be augmented in, the connected platforms that you can now link to, and the social capability. The whole thing about the car, and one of the demo videos was that you can be online doing your shopping in this to be able to get home and save yourself time. I was in the UK a couple of weeks ago doing a program, and I was amazed. I hadn't seen this before. I've been in Adelaide 3 years, and I travel within the region quite a lot in the US, but I hadn't been back to the UK. It's a bit self-centered, this story, but I was just blown away by it. So guy's on the tube, and I'm watching the guy on the tube. He's all over his phone. He gets out, and I'm just walking behind him. And there's what I can call post boxes, and it's a supermarket post box. He's been online, just having stuff delivered. He gets to it, puts a code in, pulls out, and it's his shopping. He hasn't gone and done it himself. It's there. So it's all this interconnected transport, smart city structures that's coming. And that's what these vehicles are being set up to achieve and deliver.
This is where the customer demand is not consistent, is it? I mean, I don't consider that smart shopping. I prefer to go to the shopping and the guy next to me says, don't buy that, that's rubbish, try this one.
It's all for us. If I could find another 4 hours in a day, I'd do it. No, don't get me wrong, I think it's they're divergent strategies from a social perspective. It's more focused on yourself and not necessarily society.
There's 3 square centimetre homes and sit there on their buttons.
Well, interestingly, Gen Y, and this is slightly off topic, Gen Y are happier to live in a smaller house in the city than to be with space in the suburbs. So our own aspirations of the 2.4 kids in the Labrador, they're not Gen Ys. Gen Ys would rather have the best barista within 50 metres to them.
And space is directly associated with labour.
Yeah.
They don't want to weed, they don't want to mow, they don't want to sweep, they don't want to...
They're actually compressing. If you look at the scale of city buildings, like apartments, they're actually compressing. It's not compressing because of space, it's compressing because of convenience.
Especially because you can't walk around safely at night.
So I thought I'd show a couple of vehicles. So Zoox is something we're working with now. And Zoox is quite interesting as a bi-directional vehicle. Vehicle dynamics is amazing.
I like it.
It's actually run by an Australian guy. Comes out of virtual reality, digital making, filmmaking. Really capable guy, individual. Victorian, by the way. I'll let you work that out. But an interesting vehicle, bi-directional. It's a ride-share platform. Right, it's quite interesting from a vehicle dynamics perspective. Lucid, which is a conventional vehicle, premium sedan, but interesting. Rawlinson, that we talked about earlier as the architect, is involved in this, and it's up in the Bay Area. There's quite a few capable execs from Tesla in this one, making this one work. And then next EV, this one for me is probably the most scariest. So I don't know if any of you have seen this vehicle on the test track in the US, where the driver drives it, gets out, self-learning algorithms in the vehicle. Faster than the test driver.
My computer can beat your computer.
Exactly. His processor is much stronger.
Christian, with your inside information, and sorry if I'm probing where I shouldn't be, but a lot of the social media at the moment is very focused on showing, well, me in particular, because I've got an interest in these things and it tells me what I want to see. It's very focused on showing me prototypes that are coming up.
Yep.
The Porsche one is a specific example that I use because it's been coming for 2 years and the same picture always comes up. The other manufacturers other than Tesla and obviously different countries have got things that we don't have here in Australia, which is, as we've discussed, quite
Yep.
disgusting. But these other manufacturers, are they in the race to actually release direct competitors with Tesla and these kind of companies?
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah, it goes back to that slide.
Yep.
The innovation and change from startups is twice the speed of the convention because they don't know how to break the policy. You try and buck the trend in a GM organisation or a BMW organisation, you're more likely to be fired than endorsed. Sorry, I'm on camera and I shouldn't say that.
I think there's a tendency for it seems to me, for some of the big manufacturers to be keeping their foot in the door and developing these things, but they're not really that interested in selling them or introducing them. They just want to be able to do it in case they have to.
I think it's a step into the unknown in many aspects. And if you run a car plant, right, if you want to go and replace, like, say Holden paint shop has a fire, right? You're talking hundreds of millions to replace that paint shop, right? To develop an engine has a set amount of life in its capital equipment. And that's hundreds of millions of dollars. So trying to get an OEM to turn around and say, well, actually, we create this new technology which cuts across that whole tech life cycle and commercial frame. That's a challenging. So you start to have the financial side of the business impact the innovation side. Then you want to know that actually you've got all these stage gates in this process, which takes 3.5 years. Can you deliver a car in 2 years? Yeah, I lived it. I know it can be done. But this side, it takes 3.5 years. And it's just a mindset shift.
So there's also a large part in there saying, well, I've got this infrastructure in place, I might as well milk the daylights out of it until I have to change over.
It'd be a hard conversation between the CEO and his CFO, and the chair would have to facilitate that argument. What, Faraday's Chinese. Yu-Ting, worth 3.4 billion off his TV company. Decided he wanted a car company to push his media. That's one. I think there was 110 vehicle startups in China last year. There's a lot of activity coming. So these are some of the cars that are out there, and there's no coincidence that they're all on the West Coast, right? I think for me, I called it probably 5 years ago. Detroit will become a truck manufacturing sector, and the West Coast will become the next phase mobility. I truly believe it. It's not popular in my organisation when I say that, but I think it is the truth. So we've dealt with kind of my Tesla history, we've dealt with kind of some of the landscape. What I've been doing here in this little city, it's been pretty cool. So we started off, so I personally believe cars are cool, but I don't think it's the adoption curve. I think mass transport is the adoption curve for electric vehicles. So we worked with a company from Queensland called Bustech, a company from locally called Precision Components. They make fabricated structures. They make over 100 components in a Commodore. Good company. We created a strategic alliance where we had the architecture from Bustech, we had the metal fabrication from Precision, and we had my organisation's operation and engineering capability to create the alliance. We went and talked to the state government and said, you currently, no matter what the South Australian government does, it's going to spend no matter what happens, it's fixed. Right? So he said it's criminal that we don't have Euro 6 here and we don't have a bus manufacturer in the state. And I think we can build both diesel and electric. So we got a grant to build 4 buses. So we built 2 diesel Euro 6, which were the first in Australia, which are low pollutant diesel. We use a Cummins engine, and then we designed our first electric bus, wholly designed, manufactured onshore in Australia. We currently get 38.4 litres of fuel per 100 kilometres on the diesel. Our Euro 5 runs around 44 on average in fleet. Euro 6 imports that have just come through at around 41. So fuel usage is much less. And the reason for it is we use, you can't really see that well, but we use, I'm going to cheat the phrase a little bit, we use a stainless steel monocoque. We don't outsource the chassis from Scania, Volvo, MAN, Mercedes. So our frame is around 1.2 tonnes lighter than a bus by competitor, which is we get fuel savings to weight ratio benefit. This Friday, it'll go live. So please, you were talking earlier about tweeting. The more social conscious we can create on 2 factors. 1, on creating jobs and opportunity in South Australia, and 2, the more that we can create around the acceptance of alternate fuel vehicles, it's better for it's the right thing. Based on the government's grant of 2 million, we went and secured an export contract for 50 buses, which we're currently making in SA, which will go to Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria. That in itself, across 80 suppliers and vendors, will generate $5 million revenue into SA. I think that's a pretty good return. What we're now saying to government is it's time to back a local business. Not on meritocracy. I believe in meritocracy. Our product is superior based on our bus tech architecture. And based on our relationship, Bus Tech themselves produce over 250 units nationally each year. And what we've agreed through our relationship is where we can produce product cheaper than the we will do. And we'll create some opportunities for suppliers in SA. How it works, you buy a bus is a few $100,000. The economic benefit for SA currently goes into, and I should say, we do this under Chatham House rules, yeah? Please don't share. I'll be open with you, but please don't let that come back on me. That gets a purchase order placed on a company in New South Wales who places an order into Northern Europe. Then you have to wait the best part of 12 weeks before it gets here. So work out who pays for the bus and work out the money flow out. Right? There is no economic benefit in how SA buys buses at this moment in time. We designed a chassis structure that allows you to integrate a Bosch steering system, a ZF front axle, a ZF rear axle, a Cummins engine. Yeah? These are all large businesses. The warranties aren't invalid. It's all structure, it's there. When you take this chassis, you still have to build a space frame above it, a coach. It's 1.5 tonnes of mass that you don't need. Then you trim it out. And based on this architecture being owned, we can go from what we refer to as internal combustion We own that. Now, is this the right version? No, this is 1.0. We can do 200 kilometres in that right now. And that'll be on route 99A and C with the City Connect, probably in the next 6 weeks. That's what we believe we can do, and we can add more to it. I was in the UK, but I'll be open. The first electric double decker. Right. Here. That's our intent. So we've. Sorry. It's a long way. We'll have to work out how we charge it. So everything I've shared with you is what we've developed as a model. The connection, the patronage. For us, I believe in the smart city model. If I'm in a taxi and I go past Adelaide Oval, why don't I know how many tickets there are for sale for the Saturday game? I can look online and do it, but no one's sending me a push signal. Right? If you go on the main arteries in and out of town, you'll go past the bus stops, yeah, and the bus stops tell you how long it's going to take on a certain route. Yeah, you provide that information. Your Bluetooth provide that information. There's an opportunity for when you use public transport for it to be tailored to you with what information you want to be seeing, what's relevant. Geofencing technology, marketing, it's all available. You can jump on a plane. I like this one. This one always gets people revved up. You jump on a plane in Melbourne, you get to Adelaide, it takes 55 minutes. You can watch TV on your phone, right? You can do anything. You're connected to the world. You jump on a bus in Mount Barker and you go to the CBD, and you probably lose the will to live. That's it. That's the challenge.
Can you explain how, if you're watching TV, you're connected to the world?
News.
On TV.
So look, these are the companies we're working with right now, and I'll give you a little bit of a preview. Toshiba, very stable battery, environmentally kind of stable in regards to what we're doing based on the heat load. Buses move at an average of 17 kilometres an hour. Studio 7A is engineering contact out of the UK. Design consultancy, McLaren, Mercedes. ADP is a consultants interior design group that we're using. Ford GT, they worked with Multimatic to scheme the new interior for the Ford GT, design it, test it, homologate it, and now supply it. They're our interior supply group. Pangean, vehicle electrical architectures. McLaren's latest architecture that they showed at the Zurich Motor Show, they developed it with them in parallel. FTS is a second life battery charging system using Renault technology. Cubic is a digital platform and payment structure. And then Equipmake is a high density electric motor manufacturer. Current model reflects logistics. We know the enablers. We talked a little bit about the enablers, and then all the things you should expect from product and what ultimately product may look like in the future. If you jump on the London Underground goes around 50 kilometres an hour through certain ports. You can stand up. You jump on the tram goes faster than 17 kilometres an hour, and you can stand up. Jump on a bus, and you have to sit down. And you have to go 2 by 2 by 2 by 2. Because no one's ever looked at it. And the truth of the matter is government release tenders that control how product should be. The material that you use for seats, how many people you should have on a bus. There's opportunity to change it. Megatrends. Oh, this is probably one that I'll talk about. Technology on a bus. There's no assisted technology. There's no automated technology. Every 2 days there's a cyclist either killed or injured, significantly injured in the UK. Because there's no technology. The technology we take for granted with lane change, cruise control, braking, doesn't exist on buses. Because the chassis manufacturers out of Europe can't guarantee how you're going to use the product and what you put on top of it. We talk about, these are what I refer to as the macro issues, and these are some of the micro issues in terms of the connectivity. I thought it was a really boring place to go and play, and then I realised the quantum of opportunity. Since we've been doing this program, there's an order been placed from Saudi Arabia on Mercedes for 1,000 buses. Right, so we'll drop 1,000 buses. That's a significant contract. Transport for London, 5,000 buses by 2020.
They're running out of oil.
Well, it's interesting. So there's a. Are you familiar with Dubai South?
I've been over.
Yeah. So Dubai South is a new airport that they're opening, which is going to house 500,000 people to furnish the airport because the current airport isn't good enough. Right. It's all an electric mega city that's going to happen. And Dubai have turned around and said, or the Emirates have turned around and said, we need to create a manufacturing platform. So we're talking to what that might be in terms of supporting them to create electric infrastructure. The opportunities are there. And
What I mean is they can't sell their oil, so they,
wow, I think there's enough in reserve to create a new strategy.
the price of oil's dropped again.
And then what we're working towards from the state perspective is the job creation, the carbon neutral, CBD specifically, our export opportunities and the local business. So that's really, from my side, kind of thank you for listening.
How do companies handle patent protection, especially moving forward quickly? Because I know there's lots of patents and all the government bureaucracy.
Yeah, so a good friend of mine was a patent lawyer at Google. And I would ask him, I'd say, how do you know if people are infringing you? He says, you don't. You're not paid to find out who's breaking your patent. You're paid to work out how to get leverage on them. So assume they're going to break your patent. What patents of theirs do you want to break? That was their model in Google from a software perspective. And we always found it interesting. It was all about leverage. Everyone's going to share. Yeah, well, you've got this, we're going to do this. Well, if you come at us for this, then we know you've got that. So no one wins. All you're doing is accelerating the system. I don't think it works to be protectionist. If you want something to evolve, why protect it? Elon Musk came out and said, these are all my IP. These are all my patents for electric drive. Toyota responded and said, these are all our patents for hydrogen. Well, it doesn't serve to be protectionist. If you want something to grow, I think it serves to move. And I think the more people you can have in, I don't believe in one company. So the bus model, there's 3 people involved in the manufacture of the buses. I believe in a collaboration model because you've actually got more people, more capability moving at speed, and that makes it harder for the competition to catch you. That's my personal opinion on it. So I don't think it's wise to be defensive. I think it's wise just to take your opportunity to market and see who wants to follow to create the mass. Yeah, oh cool, there's quite a few.
Just a question about
Yeah.
the electrification of the buses and that, right?
Yeah.
Can you see the O-Bahn happening?
Yeah.
Yeah?
There's quite a lot of, so in a different capacity, I work on an infrastructure committee for Marion Council, and we kind of talk around different aspects of what's happening. And there's a lot of infrastructural strategies. It used to be, it's smart city is one term that's used, but the mega city with the Gen Ys flooding in.
Yeah, well, we're moving into the city. We've got
Yeah.
an apartment on Grenfell Street, and every O-Bahn bus is going to come past our front door.
Yeah.
So we would love to see them electric.
I think it will. I think it will. And then I think people will work out, with our electric buses, we got asked, where are you going to put the infrastructure for charging? So we're not. We're going to tie it to the back of a truck. And then we're going to work out where we need to put it. We're not going to put it in somewhere first and then work out we put it in the wrong place. Let's just create some localised positions. So people have done pantograph positions above ground. They've done blade pantograph out of the ground. They're doing inductive charging. Now, I personally believe 18 months.
I can't see why you can't have electric buses with batteries for the O-Bahn. But for the entire O-Bahn strip, why can't you have pantographs like the trolley buses we had?
I think for me, it's an interesting concept. Nothing is more inefficient than moving mass that you don't need. If you look at some of the other bus manufacturers, or you go and drive a Tesla, everyone's like, well, yeah, P100, it's got the biggest battery, that's one you want for range. Well, actually, what is it you need?
If you have a pantograph for recharging, you might as well use it on that overrun strip.
Yeah, but you don't need to then create the infrastructure, because if you can put, so I run a factory off AGVs, my factory little line goes round, I have 4 pulse points of energy, and you can move through the other points quite comfortably, and I have 4 points of infrastructure. If you put the pantograph over and you put it in, it's just constant infrastructure, and there's no agility. If you create points where you can't change rates, if you put the overhead in, trams are a good example of it. If you want a flexible, agile mass transport network, you want to be able to kind of move charge points.
You have a pantograph for that fix, you can't move the bus off the O-Bahn any rate. And while you're on the O-Bahn, you use that. But when you get up
I think the O-Bahn is a luxury. I don't think.
When you get the other end and you want to keep on going through the suburb, then you use the
Can
batteries.
we just move on? I think
Yep.
Dennis wanted had a question. I think Dennis had a
Yeah.
question.
So it's just a question about the battery that you're using Toshiba.
Yep.
Was that a deliberative choice because Elon's got this partnership with Panasonic?
No. So for me, I use the phrase you don't get a second chance to create the first impression. And if you put the high density in there and it's not as robust due to the climatic cycles, the thermal loading, so on, it's a risk. So we de-risk the program. I refer to it as 1.0. There is a development cycle to get to 3.0, but right now it's a case of we can live with a safer, more stable technology. Do I personally want to move to a high density and get to 300 kilometre range and plus? Absolutely. But it's what is the right evolutionary steps and the right risk management that's governed by a board, and the board like to know their risk targets.
Samsung as well, which is in that same bracket.
Yeah, for sure. And we're looking at a longer term strategy on second life charging systems as well, which is a different technology again.
So are you using hydroids or
Lithium.
lithium?
Yeah. Yeah.
Could you tell me, please, why manufacturers create cars that do 200 to 300 kilometers an hour, while 90% of the time we can't go faster than 80?
Bragging rights.
What philosophy is behind that?
Because you can, and the market's there. In the UK alone last year, over 1,000 cars were sold over £1 million price tag. You can go and buy an Aston Martin Vulcan, designed directly for the track, which is a decontented car, and then they'll sell you the contents back for $500,000 for the privilege, because you can. That's it.
Seems to be a waste as well.
It is. It's not. It's the model that exists. It's unfortunate, but
And why did Tesla relate theirs to 155 miles an hour? Because every time you put them on the track, they're great over the quarter,
yeah.
and then they get overtaken by them all the time. That's what the car manufacturers show. We're faster, not.
For longer term, yeah. I mean, look, there's thermal load that goes into the driveline, and you don't want to.
No, you don't push the car over hard. Quarter running let you do so many push starts.
Yeah, and
Ludicrous.
yeah, it's for me what we found. What you find is because of an electric car, you have a parallel coolant circuit to the battery to manage the thermal runaway. So that takes control and governs the torque limiting, the cabin environment. Thermal runaway in a battery is not a good place, especially when the front end of the car is made of magnesium. That's a challenge. Yeah, sorry.
I've often wondered whether pay Australia to go left-hand drive. But if we have left-hand drive, as I believe Norway or Sweden have done it,
Yeah.
a switch to cut a lot of costs out. So
Look, most vehicles that are designed now are dual hand, and it's not overly complicated between left and right hand. It's simpler now with the way that the modularity is designed in. For me, I was once told, I'm trying to remember this story. In the UK, we drive on the right hand side because it goes back to jousting, Americans drive on the left-hand side because they just moved to Smith & Weston. I don't know. I'm trying to remember that story. I didn't do it justice.
Further questions before we wind up? Yep.
The dichotomy of, it looks like, and you might like to elucidate a bit further on that, moving from owning cars to sharing through some form of other leasing or other systems. Do you see that as the thing probably in the next 25 years? Yeah,
for sure. For sure. So apartment blocks now that are going up, they have community product that you can share. And for me, if your partner, your children came to you and said, I'm going to buy 3 assets. One asset is worth hundreds of thousands, one is worth tens of thousands, and one's worth hundreds. The one that I'm going to live in, I'm going to spend 12, 14 hours a day in. The one that I'm going to use for hundreds, I'm going to look at it for at least 12 hours a day. And the one I'm going to move around in, I reckon I'll use that for half hour to 45 minutes a day. What do you reckon, Dad? I'm not an accountant, chartered accountant, but I'd say, you know what, spend your money where you use it.
And the second part of that is the same as the oil, gas with Australia and America particularly, that America didn't like to going to take over Botanics, is they can't see past and how they're going to make up for the taxes, like 68% on our fuel in Australia. They can't, the dinosaurs can't see how they're going to get that out of the electric system. How do you see them being compensated so they can then up their blessing to us on electric and other vehicles?
Personal opinion, I think if we look at Australia from a natural resource perspective and we look at what's possible from a resource base, we can run pretty much off renewables, and renewables technology will improve. Something I've not shared with you at the facility, and this will come online at the end of July, we've just installed a concentrated solar system. The reason for that is concentrate. I believe you have to harvest, store, and find the industry to use. And I believe personally, I'm not, having lived in the US, I don't want to go back to the US. I think we have to focus on what our climate, what our capabilities can support, and we can run off renewables. And that is an interesting play because it changes foreign policy.
But when you've got dinosaur politicians that are in the pockets of oil companies and all those sort of things, where do we go? How do we get them to shift?
I think renewables is the answer.
Quick question on buses.
Yeah.
I think it's brilliant what you're doing with the buses here, the modular. I believe BBD, whatever it was, the Chinese company, sold about 40 electric buses to London 18 months ago. I remember reading that. Isn't that right?
The electric buses sold into London. Yeah. The last bus trial that I'm aware of was a double-decker. Well, I'm aware of 2. An electric double-decker from BYD going into the UK, where it was given special dispensation for axle weights, and then it was pulled off due to performance. And in New South Wales, where a Thai manufacturer's product came in, and it was given special dispensation, and then was pulled off the network as well.
It's the first one I read about. Yeah.
Okay, well...
Sorry, I've took a bit of too much time.
It has been insightful, unbelievably insightful. I mean, the journey you've been on and also looking, I mean, to me, I find it very exciting and it's all possible. It's fantastic. So, thank you.
Thank you.